Welcome everyone to the December 11th City Council session. George has a motion he wants to put out for your consideration, but first I wanted to take the liberty of making a comment since this is our last meeting before our break, and I think I can speak on the part of all of us. Let me extend my wishes for a safe and happy holiday season to everyone. I want to say a special thanks to our public works people who have been out night and day cleaning roads and trying to keep us safe. Thank you for those long hours of scraping, sanding, and de-icing. And a special thanks to our police and firefighters who've worked so hard to help people get where they need as well. Thanks to them for all that help with all those cars that were slipping and sliding all up and down our roads. I want to thank EWEB for all the work on broken water mains and power outages, and LTD for providing transportation under very difficult circumstances when people have no one else. So thanks to all who look for ways to help those in need and to share what they have. And I want to give a special tip of the hat to Lieutenant Klinko and Sergeant Crompton of EPD for their effectiveness and goodwill in working with those who are struggling for housing in this economy. So I want them to know that their leadership is noticed and appreciated. So,
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
So, on that, Councilor Pauling.
Thank you. Before I put the motion out, I'd just like to comment briefly. This is in reference to a parcel at 955 Coburg Road. I've been going back and forth on the right way to proceed with this. But in the long run, what I have to do is I have to represent what has been portrayed to me as the best interest of my constituents in Ward 4, primarily the Harlow Neighborhood Association. They're the ones that have contacted me. I've been contacted by that organization, by individuals, as well as a petition that was turned in the other night with almost 300 signatures on it. There's some debate around the proper zoning for that parcel dating back to 1992. So what I am requesting that we do is, and I'll put the motion out, is I move that council initiate a Metro Plan amendment to change the designation of 955 Coburg Road from R2 medium density residential to low density residential R1.
Second.
And if I can make one real quick comment, I realize this is going to cost the city a large amount of staff time that could otherwise be directed toward work on the Envision Eugene process. And it's also going to cost the city some financial responsibility. But in the long run, I think it's the right thing that we do to move this forward. How I feel about what that should be zoned, like I said, I've been going back and forth on this. In fact, I looked at that property when it first went up for sale back, I think it was in the late 1990s, and I was advised at the time that it was supposed to be R2 medium density, but I think that we should move forward with this Metro Plan amendment and change it back to R1 to make it more consistent with the entire surrounding neighborhood, which is all R1, and it's just this one parcel that's R2.
I appreciate the number of people that have come forward to ask for this help, George, but I'd like to know from Glenn, how time sensitive is this? Is this something that we need to be taking up now without having a full work session on it?
That's really a question that would be better posed to George. From a legal perspective, no, it's the council's action on this occurred in 1992. There is a LUBA appeal pending about whether the city's determination that this is medium density residential and the property should be R2, whether that's correct. And so that's pending before LUBA now. The hearings official and planning commission said it should be R2 and that the designation is medium density residential. That will proceed. Nothing the council does today, next month, the following month can impact what LUBA decides, or if it's appealed up to the Court of Appeals, what the Court of Appeals decides. So from a legal perspective, no, the council doesn't have to take this up today, but I understand that George has had conversations with the neighborhood association, and I'm not sure what their position would be.
I guess my follow-up question, this is really not about the yes or no or anything about that. It's, when I was asking you, is there anything, and you basically said nothing is pending, that this is going to, that it needs to be acted on in this short day.
Correct. It doesn't have to be acted on today. If it's initiated today, the process for a Metro Plan amendment is 4 to 6 months. There are, and George alluded to it, there are costs associated with it. If somebody had applied for the Metro Plan amendment, the fee would be somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 for that. If the council initiates it, then the city absorbs that cost. The planners who would work on the Metro Plan amendment are planners who are currently working on other things, and so doing this will divert somebody's attention from what they're currently working on to working on this.
Thank you. I've got Mike in the queue and then Alan in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor.
And George.
I, too, have had multiple contacts from a good number of people living in the same area about this, and so I asked about it. I mean, I want to make sure we're doing the right thing as well here, and suggested some alternative ideas that might get to fair quicker or sooner without so much expense. But I think George's motion is the right way to go, and I'll support it because it gives everybody involved in this process their opportunity to come forward, to speak, to give their presentation of information before council makes a fair decision. So I think it's the right way to go. It's not expeditious by any stretch, but it's the way to get everybody the chance to be heard in the process and make an intelligent and fair decision. I would, however, note that I've been presented with a number of documents talking about what the Planning Commission intended at that time. I believe one of our colleagues may have been on the commission at that time, as I recall, and signed a letter as to intent, so I'd let him speak to that. But I have heard from a number of the people who were involved in the process of creating that refinement plan, much like what we're going to talk about with River Road and Santa Clara, and letting the neighbors decide the sort of things that comprise their refinement plan. And everybody that I've heard from that was involved in that process made it really clear that that was intended as low-density residential. The property owner has rights and needs to be heard. So I think this is the right process to go forward and settle the question.
Glenn.
I have provided some background to George, and I thought it might be helpful if I provide it to the rest of the council. You heard the testimony and saw what the Neighborhood Association had provided. There was it sounds like a community team that put together a plan, and that plan said 7 acres, including this 1 acre parcel we're talking about, should be redesignated from medium density to low density back in 1991. That plan and the staff's recommendation to do that went to the Planning Commission. At the Planning Commission, the property owner, the then property owner of this 1 acre site, asked that the property remain medium-density residential. The Planning Commission passed a specific motion dealing with this specific piece of property, concluding that the property should remain medium-density residential. So that was in 1992. That then came to the council on the same night that the Willikinzie Area Plan came to the council, and the council's action at the time had as part of its action the findings that dealt with this specific piece of property and said this specific acre should remain medium-density residential. So the information about what the original intention was, that was not the original intention of the Planning Commission or of the City Council. The Planning Commission passed a motion specific to this piece of property before they took final action, saying this property should remain medium-density residential. The council, in adopting the ordinance on the Metro Plan designations, had a sentence or a finding that said this piece of property should remain medium-density residential. So this was not a Scrivener's error. It wasn't a mistake by staff. It was a deliberate and deliberative decision by the Planning Commission and then a deliberate action by council. You certainly can change it, But if you're changing, it's because you conclude, or the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, you conclude it should be low-density residential. But this is not putting into place the original intent of either the Planning Commission or the City Council.
Okay. Alan, you're next.
Which apparently is pretty clear by these motions and the work that was done back in 1992. So, and I understand things change over time. My problem is this is too much on the fly right now. Instead, and how much work does it entail to do a Metro Plan amendment? Can you walk through that steps? I know it's an enormous amount of work, but can we get an outline of what that looks like?
Carolyn can talk better to that.
Well, we're doing some Metro Plan amendments right now in some other areas. So what I can tell you is that we would want to get input from all the stakeholders who are interested in that. We would make a recommendation. We would take that to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission would make a recommendation, and at that point we would bring it to the council. Now, there's a lot of findings that need to go into that, official public notice and things like that. And it just depends on the level of interest in the site and how much controversy may be involved, kind of how long it gets drawn out.
But when we had those before, they're about that thick.
Oh, yeah,
They're hundreds of pages of stuff.
often.
So I appreciate that the neighbors have brought this to our attention, but at this point, if we pass this motion, we're asking to initiate all of that work without actually knowing if that's what we want to do as a council, which is my problem with it. The original, what Glenn sent us today was actually the city manager, that we do a work session on this, that we bring it back, we have a conversation about it, learn the history, what the issues are, have the neighbors talk about it, and George can talk about it, and so we can lay out all of that information, and then out of that, I think that would be an appropriate time to have a motion either to or not to try to amend the Metro Plan. But to go straight from where we are right now to a Metro Plan amendment seems putting the cart before the horse without a lot of information and a lot of history that needs to be vetted. So I appreciate what George is trying to do, but would you accept a friendly amendment to initiate a work session? Then I'll move to amend the motion to have the city manager do a work session and for discussion of the Metro Plan amendment for 955 Colbrook Road.
There's a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Further discussion? George, you want to speak to this?
Well, not to the,
You still
only,
have a queue for this.
only to oppose it, because I agree with what Councilors Clark and Poling said, and I will support the original motion.
Okay, and Chris, do you want to speak to this?
I can, yeah, they're linked. I am not that familiar with this issue, and I really appreciate George bringing it up. You're doing a good job representing your area, and you've been contacted by a lot of folks. I don't know this issue that well, and for me, that's always a quandary, because if I don't know the issue, then my general position has been I'm no until I have enough information to be yes. And which I think is prudent from the standpoint of you don't want unintended consequences. And I don't think there's probably a lot of negative consequences, but I don't know. So it's not that I'm not supportive of the idea of rezoning this property. I don't know enough to know whether I support it or not. My concern is if we initiate a process and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, then I'm being asked to say yes to something that I don't know what the consequence of it is. And so I like the idea of Alan's amendment because it doesn't say it's not important. It is important. I mean, anything that the public brings to us about an issue is important. I just want to do it in a way where I can feel I have the knowledge and then make the decision. So I don't want the issue to go away. I do want us to deal with it, but I want to deal with it in a way that I can feel comfortable with. And so I'll probably vote for the amendment. And if I vote against George's motion, it's not because I don't think it's an important motion. I just want to do it in a way where I'm comfortable with giving my yes vote. So even if I vote no and it doesn't pass, we'll still pursue it. We'll still figure out a way to go after it.
Betty, you're in first round.
Thank you. If I understood Glenn correctly, what we do doesn't really make any difference. We vote on it today. Is that correct?
If the council, I'm not sure what you mean by that. If
Well,
the
you said
council
it's already
passes
been
the-
appealed, and Luba will make a decision.
Luba's making a decision about the current Metro Plan designation. The council has the authority to change the Metro Plan designation, and that's what George is initiating, is to change the Metro Plan designation.
Regardless of what Luba does.
Regardless. So if we vote for this, it does make a difference then if we vote for it today.
The real difference is if ultimately you approve the Metro Plan designation. This is simply the start of the process to go through the steps to change it to low-density residential.
Thank you.
All right, second round, Mike, and then George Poland.
Thank you, thank you, Mayor. Then I was told about, just to, as we go through this process, it would be helpful to me. I was told about a letter signed by all the Planning Commission members to council, either immediately prior to or after this particular decision. It would be really helpful to me if I could get a copy of that. I was told about, and maybe perhaps my colleague can enlighten what that particular thing was about, but my understanding was that it had some relevance to this, so, and to the decision council made, so that's why I was looking for a copy of that if we could get it.
George, is that the letter that was included in the packet that you were given? Is that what Mike's talking about?
No. That
If
letter
there's
was-
a different letter from the Planning Commission, I haven't seen it.
It's not from the Planning Commission so much as it's signed by each of the planning commissioners. Perhaps.
If I can get a copy of it, I will certainly get it to the council.
Okay.
Greg, you want to enlighten?
So I can't enlighten you because I can't recall. That's 21 years ago.
I thought you had a photographic memory, brother.
Short-term memory is the first thing to go, Greg.
There are some documents that are in my garage that I have not seen in about 18 years. So it would help if we had those documents fresh, and then I can probably enlighten you on what the thinking was around the table at that particular time. But right now, I don't have that amount of recall.
What's wrong with you, Greg?
Crying out loud.
53, man. Just turned 50.
George Poland?
Well, actually, I was in the queue to the original motion, speaking to the amendment. I can't support the amendment. I think the information that we need will be forthcoming with the process of the Metro Plan amendment, and we'll have all the information laid out to us at that time.
All right, George Brown.
Yeah, I agree with that. That was going to be my point, is that's how we're going to get all the information that we need, is once we initiate this process. There'll be, public testimony, we'll receive emails, we'll receive all kinds of testimony, and there'll be public hearings, everything will come out once we initiate the process, so.
Alan, then we're going to vote on your...
Yeah, I was just, a lot of the information at the work session would, if we move to do a Metro Plan amendment, would be useful. So it's not wasted time by any means, but it allows the council then to have a full breadth of what the information is before we go into and doing a full-blown Metro Plan amendment, which is an enormous amount of work by staff. If we're going to be doing this one, it's also a trade-off for me. If we're going to do this one, then we're not doing we're slowing down expansion of the UGB, we're doing a whole bunch of other things around the Envision Eugene that are in the queue that this one takes place of, because we only have a limited amount of staff. So I want to be very careful about that. And also what Chris is talking about, this may be where we end up, but in the absence of a lot of information and having heard about this on Monday night and then a couple of emails in the interim, and I appreciate where you're coming from, George, in terms of you've already decided this is where you want to go. I don't even know much about this yet. So I'm in that same position which Chris is where if I don't know enough about it, I'm not about to embark on a really giant process with a lot of staff time and an enormous amount of effort without having a lot of background in it.
Okay, so now we're going to vote.
Mayor, before you
Yes.
vote, I just want to, in case it matters to any of you, what George Brown said about you'll be getting emails. If you initiate the Metro Plan amendment, you have started a quasi-judicial process, ex parte communications start, and those things kick into play. And so my advice to you is, if you initiate this, do not have any communications with anybody. If you adopt Alan's amendment and you had not initiated it, you would still be able to have communications with anybody. That wouldn't be part of a quasi-judicial process.
But up to this point, any conversations or emails aren't,
For the quasi-
Correct. Yeah, it's only after the initiation of the quasi-judicial process.
All right, all those in, it's a substitute motion.
It's an amendment. Yeah, same thing.
An amendment.
But it sounds like it's after.
Motion to me. All right. Alan's amendment, all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. In opposition, 4. I'm going to support having a work session first, so it does not pass, but we will have a work session.
No, Mayor, that you just, in essence, amended the main motion. You now need to vote on the main motion again.
As amended.
Correct.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion as amended, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. In opposition, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'd be 5, and so it passes. All right, moving on to the,
So we don't need a work session poll, that's just going to become.
that's a poll.
We have a date specific for that
Definitely.
work session?
Deal with that issue.
Do we have a date specific for that work session?
Would we?
But we will as soon as we...
Probably February.
Okay, work session on River Road, Santa Clara. Outreach, please.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Renee.
Hi, thank you. We're here to give you an update on our conversations with the River Road, Santa Clara neighborhood on the voluntary annexation conversation with that group. So today we have Jerry Finnegan, who's the chair of the Santa Clara Community Organization, and John Belcher, who's chair of the River Road Community Organization.
Actually, co-chair.
Co-chair, sorry. Thank you, John. And Lisa Gardner, who's the staff lead on this topic. And you'll be seeing more of us in the months to come, but we're going to give you an update today. And also, the mayor, Councilor Clark, and Councilor Surratt is also going to add a little bit as we go based on some of the work that we've been doing. So I'm just going to kick it over to Lisa.
Great. Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. As you know, we held a work session in May on this topic. It's a very complex topic with a long history. What we're trying to do is sift through that and continue moving the dialogue towards a potential voluntary annexation process. So since you last met in May, we've convened what we were calling sort of a steering group of the Santa Clara River Road implementation team, and that has consisted of Jerry, John, Carlene Riley, and Ann Vaughn. And in October, we held listening sessions, one-on-one listening sessions, facilitated by Bob Chadwick and Diane Seahaver with over 25 residents. We learned that a number of things, among those that there are still a lot of negative feelings carried over from the sewer project days. There's an extremely strong sense of community in River Road and Santa Clara. There's high value for the qualities of the rural area, including the lack of sidewalks and some of the physical characteristics. One of the things that we heard that was new to me, I'm sure not new to the residents, but there's this strong sort of soils culture. In almost every conversation we had, people talked about the soils, and not specifically from the perspective of larger scale agriculture, but really more home, backyard scale agriculture, and that this has been something that's created a culture in the neighborhood and has been a mechanism for connecting people, whether they're doing farm stands, some of the CSAs, community supported agriculture for starts, and different things have happened. And it's really a very thriving and very apparent culture. There continues to be a lot of concern about development, fear of development, absent having any kind of a plan that would dictate how development might happen. And there's a strong interest in proactively planning. And one of the things that we've heard that I think we've known for a while, but the Parks District is just an extremely cherished asset. There's a strong culture around that. It's almost like it's a family asset. People remember when the Parks District was created, whether it was their parents or their grandparents. They grew up there as kids. Some people worked there growing up, and it's something that there's a strong sense of identity around and a strong desire to preserve that particular culture and how those services are provided. Included among those that we had listening sessions within the 101 where both the Parks District manager and board chair, and we have continued to engage them. Our hope is to have a facilitated conversation with their board. They weren't available to do it in December, so we're trying to get something scheduled after the first of the year to continue that process more broadly, talking about how services for the Parks District could continue to be provided under an annexation scenario. We then invited the full script committee, along with the mayor, Councilor Surratt, and Clark, and the city manager and staff, to a conversation in November, the weekend of November 23rd. We got together with 17 people, so it's almost full participation. I think there were 2 or 3 people who weren't able to make it from the script group. And we had a facilitated conversation, again, with Bob Chadwick and Diane Seahaver. I did just send you a copy of that last night, which I received yesterday afternoon. So hopefully you at least received it, if not had a chance to take a look at it. Again, we heard common themes from those that were expressed at the October listening session. One of the most clearly stated desires that we heard, that was expressly stated, was this concept of self-determination, that this group of neighbors who have been committed to, for the past 2 years, identifying what issues are and coming up with next steps, want to be in the driver's seat, want obviously to have city facilitation, city collaboration, but they want to be determining what happens to their neighborhood. There was specific asks for city help in terms of facilitation, outreach and communication pieces, so resources to do that. There's very clearly expressed desire to have an area plan, and that an area plan for many needs to precede any discussions around annexation, because there's this concern that if we annex, there'll be no guarantee that we'll know how our area is going to develop. And then there was a specific ask for financials, and that's what we're going to talk about next, but wanting to know what financials they can share in terms of what the impacts to the residents would be and how services would be provided under an annexation scenario. There's a strong desire for people for there to be more outreach from the neighbors, from the script folks, to their neighborhood, including those who have been historically in opposition. So at this point, I'd like to ask Jerry and then John to share their perspective from the work that's been done. And then I'd like to ask the mayor, Councilors Clark and Surratt to share, and the city manager to share their perspectives as well.
Okay, this is pretty complicated, and so I'm trying to get a whole lot in a little bit here. But we've gotten here through the transition report in 2006. The River Road and Santa Clara came together in 2009 to form a joint strategy team that resulted in Scroll, which you all know about, which went from 2010 to 2012 and came up, had a lot of contacts, and came up with a lot of recommendations. SCRIPT is Santa Clara River Road Implementation Planning Team, which is charged with trying to implement these recommendations. Scroll findings was really just a testing and refining of the transition team findings. So it's always been trying to focus in more and more and more. Trouble is that there's 33,000 people out here, or in River Road and Santa Clara, and making sure that you've got great valid information is tough. Bob Chadwick's conclusions after he interviewed really a random group from the area was that Scroll's findings are eminently valid. So SCRIPT hopes to implement the neighborhood visions, hitching our efforts to the Envision Eugene. Also, there's a more receptive attitude in our neighborhood toward the city, and the willingness of the city of Eugene to partner with us. All these kind of come together to make the timing just right for this conversation, really, about annexation and area plans and whatever else. The listening session's first step in developing strategies to achieve the SCRIPT goals, with annexation being one possible tool to reach some of these goals. And so that discussion really needs to happen in terms of what's right about it, what's wrong about it for us, and how, if we decide to do it, how it could be implemented with all the people that we have. There's some time pressures that we're feeling right now. Given our neighborhood's past experience, we feel the pressure of time to accomplish our goals, while there's still a city council and a city staff that's committed to work with us.
Thank you. Well, thanks to the council, mayor, and staff for working with us on this issue and continuing the discussion. It can't come too soon. Just this week, the rest of the Planning Commission is deliberating on an appeal of the hearings official's approval of a PUD on River Road. The opponent's primary argument is that Oakley Lane will have to be developed to full city standards before the project can begin. If an area plan was in place, the commission would be guided by the neighborhood's vision of what our street should look like and function. This is one example of why we want to start area planning as soon as possible. A plan would enable us to address 2 of the 4 pillars of the Scroll Report, land use and transportation. Another pillar is parks and recreation. Folks in Santa Clara are hoping to see parity with the rest of the city of Eugene and the numbers of development parks there. And River Road voters just renewed the River Road Parks levy by a 3-to-1 landslide, which demonstrates the attachment that we have to that district. A solution that ensures the viability of the district will have to be found before many of us will consider annexation. Annexation is a potential solution to governance, the 4th pillar. It is my opinion that once neighbors explore these issues as we work to develop an area plan and see resolution to the parks issue, they will be ready to consider voluntary annexation. I believe that this task can be completed in the 2 to 4 year average guesstimated by the neighbors and city staff in the meeting that you heard about. That time frame can be accelerated by predefining the area plan process so it can begin as soon as Envision Eugene is completed, and by using the area plan outreach to inform neighbors of any potential annexation offers. We look forward to working with the city to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you have any comments you want to make?
Sure. I'm relatively new to this whole issue, which has been an ongoing concern for folks in that area, and I really appreciated the opportunity to be part of the listening session and to engage with more folks who are part of that process. Even before I came onto council, Jerry set up a meeting with me and filled me in on the history of the work there. So at this point, I'm really in a listen and learn mode still, wanting to support the Script and Scroll folks in their vision and keep this moving forward. And I especially appreciate the work of the city manager and staff to support the process and keep our eyes on the goal and figure out how we can work cooperatively together. And I also appreciate what John Belcher noted about the River Road Parks District and recognizing that that is an asset that we need to figure out how we can maintain and bring that forward in this process in a way that works for the folks who care so much about it.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate both of these gentlemen very much. I have, since becoming a counselor for part of Santa Clara area, been, and first meeting Mr. Finnegan here, I've had a chance to meet with him for years now, and I know and have been at least a small part of watching and listening and participating to some degree in the work that's gone on, that he's dedicated a huge chunk of his life to making sure that River Road and Santa Clara come out and maintain protection as a very livable place. And John, having just gotten involved out in River Road area as well, is doing a fantastic job, and I appreciate their involvement very much. This script process is a fantastic one. It's the ultimate outcome of the work that's been done so far. At its best, it's a protection process. Its purpose is to protect the livability of that area, and that's a good one. It's an admirable goal, and we should do it. And as John mentioned, annexation may or may not be a particular tool as a part of that process of protecting the livability of that area. I first brought up the idea of asking staff to come back to us with a comprehensive plan for how we'd offer the opportunity of voluntary annexation as its own goal, rather than as a part of the process that these gentlemen and many, many others have been so involved in. The reason for that is about the timing. Part of the, and it's important to note that although it was kind of presented a little differently, and I have great respect for both these men and everyone in the process, but anybody in Santa Clara and River Road can annex at their leisure. they're free to annex, and it's an individual's process. My suggestion was that we make an offer because of the timing, because the county is in the condition that it's in, and their capacity to deliver services is at an all-time low for county residents in that area where the city isn't. My concern is that if we wait for 4 years until we actually initiate an offer or an invitation, that the county will have changed their nature and the opportunity will be much less attractive for those county residents, and we will be much less successful in this. My friends, whom I respect, have said, please don't initiate this process of inviting annexation for all of the residents until they finish their area plan. I suggest that it's wiser for us to proceed at least in parallel in this process, to take advantage of the timing that exists and the nature of the situation so that we have a higher degree of success with individuals being there. And I hope that they'll come along with the process of working together that way.
I just have a couple comments that I'd like to make. First of all, having been involved in this since, not as long as you guys have, but involved in it since the early 90s in this discussion, and feeling like this is the moment where opportunity is at hand for moving forward after such a long, long time. So for the folks who've been out there and working on this doesn't feel like something that's just appeared. It feels like something they have been working on forever. And it's gotten to a place where something can really happen. And I think from listening to them, that they feel a lot can happen in a couple of years if we just put our minds to it. They are very concerned that they have the tools to do some good outreach to their neighbors, and they think their best chance of doing outreach to neighbors is kind of a one-on-one thing where you go out and talk to the people, and once you talk about what I heard them say was, when we talk about the vision, we agree on the vision, and then it's not about annexation. It's about annexation as a tool to get you the vision that you want to have in your community. As long as it's about the notion of annexation, it's kind of a non-starter. When it's about who we want to be as a community and the best way to get there for all of us, and let's talk about it and figure it out and make it happen, then I think we're in business with each other. So I think they're very optimistic and ready to work with us and just ask us to work with them through this and find the right path together. But they definitely want to be in the driver's seat of their own community, but I think they understand that the best way to their vision is working together. And so I feel very extremely grateful for the number of citizens who have spent so much time working on this. I can't imagine the number of years that people have put into trying to preserve and even better the situation that they're in. The kind of riparian discussions we're having now weren't even a glimmer in our eyes years ago. We were mostly just talking about stay out of my business. And I think now we're talking about things that we value and care about and want to hold on to for River Road and Santa Clara and for the whole community. And that's where we are. It's a really kind of marvelous point, because they're here to ask you to help them move forward with it.
Thank you. Just to add a couple of things that I heard, and it's interesting, as I mentioned at that group when I first came 5+ years ago, there are two topics people suggested I never pursue or touch, one of which is annexation, River Road, Santa Clara. So here we are, and I think in a positive way. In Vision Eugene, one of the things I learned in Envision Eugene for many neighborhoods, but for these two neighborhoods particularly, they're a bit on the spear of the development that's going on, and that there's a deep richness in those neighborhoods that people want to preserve. And so we committed as a part of that process to put this out in front as one of those, to try to really achieve those kind of outcomes that the neighborhoods are looking for. Part of what I think is interesting about Envision Eugene, and this ties into that, it's about setting an urban growth boundary, but it really is actually more about how we build community in a different way. And that's really what I think we're trying to do through Envision Eugene, but also through the work with River Road in Santa Clara. And is there a way to achieve multiple outcomes that work for all of us? One of the things that somebody's mentioned at the Bob Chadwick session was it's really about self-determination, not self-governance. And so that resonates a lot with me because I do think it says that the residents want to self-determine what those neighborhoods really look like. And I support that, but it's not about self-governance, which I also support. And so I think it's, as many have mentioned, several windows of opportunity have opened at the moment, and we might as well be okay stepping through a couple of them and at least seeing what's there. So
I've got Chris and Alan in the queue. Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate this issue coming up. I think it's an issue that has to be checked in with every so often just to make sure we're talking about it. I had the opportunity to talk with somebody who lives in that area. I would consider an opinion leader not too long ago at an event, and talked about this issue. I said, what do you think about the idea? Do you think people would be open to voluntarily annexing if they were provided sufficient incentive to do it? And he said, no way, no how, no circumstance. He said, memories are very long, and they pass it on to their children. So it's not like, oh, they'll all die and then everything will be okay. It won't. They pass it on to their children. Those kind of animosities are still there. And I think the vote on the River Road Park District was extremely indicative of the pride that neighborhood has, extreme pride. And River Road's also a good example of how people feel that they are being betrayed by the city of Eugene that is trying to kill their park district. We are seen as trying to kill that park district, and so that immediately gives you a sense of what's going on there. I've worked with both Jerry and John for a long time. I think I worked with Jerry first on Santa Clara School way back when, and I trust both of them to be representatives of their area. And so when they say their perspective on the neighborhood, they're speaking for themselves, but they are also speaking for what I think is a strong perspective in that neighborhood. And in the conversations I've had over many years, the word that keeps coming back to me over and over and over again is trust. We will not get anything done as a community or even in that area until there is sufficient tangible trust between our two areas. That trust does not exist at this point. And you can offer voluntary annexation, you can offer dollar payoffs, you can offer whatever you want to, but if the trust is not there, nothing will come of it. So you say, how do we establish trust? What's it going to take? And I think when I don't trust somebody, that's where you have contracts. That's where you have agreements. That's where you have facts and things that protect you when you lack trust. That's why the process that John and Jerry talk about, where we say we need to put in place a process where I can feel comfortable that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and the information is clear, that is one of the ways you begin to get to trust. And so I think we're moving in the right direction by making sure that our process is one that engenders trust. I don't want to have a process that looks like it's trying to circumvent all those trust-building mechanisms. So I support the creation of an area plan. I think that is absolutely what you have to do if you want to try to begin to build that trust. But for me, we don't have it right now. And we won't have it for a while, and we got to do the things that will create trust before we try to do any other things.
Alan?
Yeah, this is a controversial but important, long-standing issue, and I think trust is a very big issue. And I look at the map; there hasn't been a lot of annexations that happened in that 2008 to today period, but I like the concept of an area plan. And I think that would help. But I'm curious about what Mike was talking about. I'm wondering if they're incompatible or if they can't happen at the same time. And if you could go into a little bit more detail about it. And is this related to that? We did a pilot a couple of years back where we had a property that was annexed, and we held them harmless for 10 years in terms of their tax burden. And so in that case, then it would actually be, that's not actually revenue neutral, that's actually cost the city in that context. But because everybody has to, in the city, pays the same rate except for these people. So I'm curious what your idea is and how it, and if it's consistent or compatible with, or maybe they can happen at the same time.
I'll get back to you after.
You may have to repeat your questions.
And I also want to let you know that I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the financials on the order of what Councilor Zelenka was talking about in terms of holding people harmless and what revenue impact that might have.
Greg?
Thanks, Mayor. Since I lived in River Road for 5 years on Berwyn Lane, and my in-laws still currently live there and lived there for over 50 years, I have a little bit of an idea of, kind of the push and pull that is there between the idea of coming into the city versus, retaining some level of autonomy by, staying in the county. And what I've learned over the years is this, is that if the way that we approach this, in terms of what Councilor Pryor talked about in terms of trust, is that we need to build trust on an issue-by-issue basis. Area plan will begin to develop that. Some of the things that we're talking about right now, we're not in the most robust situation to provide, which is public safety is one of the big areas with police. We've got to deal with the issue of fire districts that are out there, and our own fire department. And then the other big elephant in the room is the Parks District and how we grapple with that, considering that we are now having to grapple with our own issues around financing parks and maintaining parks under our current budget situation. So the way that I would approach it, and the way that I've heard people around there talk about it, my former neighbors and my in-laws' neighbors have talked about it, is there has to be an initial event or a move to create a situation where trust can be established. And whether that means that we do something in the area of public safety that would merge functions with the area and with the city, that begins to provide more service out there, also understanding that service cost. And I don't know if that's the creation of a special district or how that would come about, but I think that those are the things that need to be talked about very, very delicately and carefully when you're talking about, people who have invested their lives and their resources into that community. So I would say that would be the approach that I would take. I'm not sure if Councilor Clark's simultaneous approach would work or not, but it might be worth exploring and trying.
Betty?
Thank you. Well, we already have a checkerboard situation in those areas. People don't, and as for providing services, I know that sometimes the police go and then the police don't know, and the sheriff's department personnel sometimes don't know which it is. My first experience out there was about 30 years ago when I was accosted on my bicycle, and I went to someone and asked them to call for help because I needed to continue on the bike path. And they didn't know whether they were in the city or the county. And they made a call, and they weren't able to find out even. So the man just got his coat and rode his bike with me till I got out of the area. But I think that sometimes our police already go out there and then find out, no, it's not in the city. At least I've heard that, and they can't help. So it's a ridiculous situation. Now, I think we're suffering from, as everyone knows, we're suffering from past mistakes. The way the sewer situation happened was really, I wasn't involved at all, but even though I've been on the council forever, I wasn't here then. And I think it was, people feel that was done very badly. And then there's the parks that people naturally want to preserve, and I don't know if we can find a way to guarantee that they keep their park district, or whether we can decide we'll all be in a park district or what, but I think that's a really important thing. But I agree with Mike, I do that every once in a while, that we could, I think the voluntary annexation, since we already have the checkerboard thing, it's not making things any worse. And if we could guarantee, I said this at the time that we guaranteed the 10-year tax situation to one person, one place that we annexed, that at least if we could say for 10 years your taxes will not go up, I think that would help a lot. And I think we should try that with anyone who wants to annex. And I think there are reasons why people would like to be in the city, a library card, even though that's a real nuisance to some people to have to pay for a library card. And and also they could vote for their city councilors and the mayor, which they can't do now. And I think I once in another community asked to annex because I wanted to be able to vote for my government. And that is another advantage. But the park size, what I see as a big stumbling block. But I think that we could do things simultaneously and let people who wish to annex do so with a guarantee. As you know, someone mentioned it would cost us money. I don't think it would cost us money. We're already, as I've already said, already spending money sometimes to send police out went to the wrong place. Thanks.
George Foley.
Thank you. I agree with one of the things that Betty was talking about, and that's representation, because a lot of what the city of Eugene does either directly or indirectly affects the residents that live in the county portions of the River Road, Santa Clara area. So I think that part of it is very important. I moved here in 1976, and one of the first nights I was out working, my coach that evening was telling me about the River Road, Santa Clara area and all the problems that it had, and all the even at that point, the people that were living in that area did not want to become part of the city of Eugene. In fact, the big topic then was forming their own city, which I think at the time would have made the area probably the third or fourth largest city in the state based on the population, somewhere in that area. So that, the conversation has been around a very long time. I'm kind of curious about the simultaneous approach to this, the city and the neighborhoods, because I'm sure there are certain areas or certain concerns that can be addressed that can be, one part of the city may have some information or may be able to assist the neighborhood association or the neighbors or the people living in that area, and vice versa. So, and also duplication. There's no sense of both groups working on the same problem in different directions when they should actually be working on it together to come up with a mutual agreement. So I'm curious about maybe going into that simultaneous approach a little bit farther. I've got a friend that's lived out in the same house in the Santa Clara area, and I brought this up last time we had this discussion, and he has been a longtime advocate of fighting annexation. And here about a year or so ago, I got an email from him, said, I think now's the time. He said, with the county's situation and everything else, he said, I for the longest time have been opposed to annexation, but I think, now is the right time. To him, it was worth the added taxes. And Betty brought up another point about the police and fire response as well. Hopefully they've got the computer system worked out a little bit better than when I was working there to help figure out where you are. But still, to this day, you could go and stand in the middle of an intersection and be surrounded by different jurisdictions on each corner. So the coverage for the fire department was there, and sometimes, when I was on calls, I didn't know what fire department was there. There was big red trucks with lights flashing and guys in heavy raincoats. The people in the River Road, Santa Clara area had the fire protection that they needed, but probably could use some more. And it's not because of the quality of fire service provided, it's just the number of people they had. Police protection, I know that in order to adequately to protect the River Road Santa Clara area would take a major undertaking by our department, probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 40 officers to adequately patrol that area.
Yes, Lisa?
Well, I just wondered if I could jump in and talk about the financials a little bit, because some of your comments are speaking to that. So everybody should have in front of them two different pieces of paper. If you don't, let me know. We've got extras. One says River Road Santa Clara hold harmless tax revenue. And the other is hold harmless taxes for a median home. Does everybody have both of those?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So as some of your comments have reflected, there's a number of factors that make it very challenging to prepare financial information on potential annexation. There's revenues dependent on the number of people who would choose to annex. Cost variables would depend on, again, the number of people who would choose to annex and the cost of providing service to those people. For the purposes of sharing financial information today, we're trying to use broad brush strokes to paint a very general picture that shows relative sort of order of magnitude costs of revenue and then service. So the assumptions in front of you, the table assumes, and if you look at the hold harmless tax revenue to City of Eugene sheet of paper, it assumes a 100% annexation rate. And it assumes that service provided to 100% of the residents currently outside of the city in River Road Santa Clara. It's assuming that the River Road Park District is held harmless, so service continues as it is today, and the money that's collected goes directly to the Park District. And it also assumes fire continues as it is, and that the money collected from the Santa Clara Water District continues to pay for fire services as it does. So if you look at this, and as I said, I would give both Sue Kutza-George and Larry Hill heartburn if I didn't make some caveats that these are very general numbers, very non-specific. We'd want to do a lot more analysis before we move forward. But taking an average for River Road and Santa Clara, we would have approximately $400,000 net available for new services after paying for River Road Park District, taking up for bonds and urban renewal, and covering for fire service. And so one of the issues is that we would have to figure out what type of what services would be provided to these residents under an annexation scenario. And that's part of what these folks have talked about in terms of doing more outreach and talking to the neighborhood about prioritizing that. But assuming that we need to provide police service, again, very rough numbers, but the cost of putting out one 24/7 shift for one officer is in the range of $750,000 to $1 million. And so if you had full annexation and we have approximately, $400,000 to $600,000 in revenue, that doesn't cover one shift. So I think the questions moving forward are, one, we need to continue working with the Script folks to do more outreach and hear from people on what their thoughts are on annexation, what their priorities would be for services, and then figuring out on a much more geographic-based analysis what service costs would be. And so the decisions would have to be made. If you wanted to hold people harmless, how would you fund that? Because it's clearly not a revenue-neutral scenario.
Just to clarify on the police shift, it's, to do one position or one posting 24/7, 365 is really 6 or 7 officers, and George, that's why the number is like that. Maybe I could just comment just briefly on the parallel process. We are de facto pursuing a parallel process because the previous guidance by the council or direction from the council is to put together sort of this deal package that we can offer. And so for us, we will continue to do that unless council says we don't want you to do that anymore. With that, we also are pursuing this other process, which is that self-determination process that really goes through the planning process and all of that as well. And even in the other piece of it, we will continue to work with the neighbors in that. So we're de factoing kind of in that parallel process anyhow based on previous direction that the council's already provided. And so I just wanted to make some clarification. What that looks like coming back, we don't know yet, but we're at least de facto in that process based on your guidance before.
I want to give Mike a chance to explain his...
Answer Alan's
the
questions.
Yep.
Thank you. And I would say that there's a great deal of truth around this table and what's being said. The area plan is critically important. Making sure that that's done is critically important. But what Chris said is true as well, in that this is about trust, and what Greg said. But for the involved residents involved in local governance like these gentlemen, that area plan is a critically important thing that'll help with trust a great deal. Whereas without it, this conversation's kind of getting set up as a us versus them thing, which troubles me, frankly. But as Chris points out, most people in River Road and Santa Clara, frankly, a huge chunk of which are renters, and the property owners live elsewhere. But whether or not we have an area plan created would mean absolutely nothing to them in terms of enhancing trust for them to do this. And that's kind of my point, is that these numbers, due respect, have a great number of assumptions in them. So the conclusions are based on the assumptions. We would have to have a pretty detailed discussion about the assumptions before we could talk about what the conclusions mean. I would tell you that I believe it's in the city's long-term interest for us to be one city. It's in Senate Bill 100. It's in all of the processes that we go through for that to be the case. It's also important. Excuse me, important that the residents in that area protect themselves, because that's where the greatest density will be targeted once we finish with Envision Eugene. So protecting them is critically important. But we're, as the mayor mentioned, at a particularly sweet spot in time. We have a staff who's very capable and desires this outcome. We have a very collegial council wanting to work together with the area, and we have some leaders from the area who've been working very hard for a long time. We also have the county in the spot that it's in its inability to deliver public safety services. If Senator Wyden succeeds and the county begins to build more revenue, which could happen, that may not be the case 4 years from now. They may not need, the individual who isn't moved by an area plan may not need the addition of public safety that can be had by becoming part of Eugene. That incentive would be less effective. The issues around what incentivizes those people are governance, public safety, paying the same amount they do now for a limited period of time, and that we've discussed before. I think that, as some have mentioned, they're separate issues, and we should treat them that way. We should continue ahead with the area plan, because doing so is critically important. But we shouldn't necessarily say we should wait on anything else until that's done, because I don't think we stand a larger chance of it having less success if we do.
We'll leave a few minutes for us to hopefully briefly talk about the economic regional prosperity thing. So, Alan, you're last up here. Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Mike just said, with the caveat that given this analysis, and there are a bunch of assumptions in here, that this would end up being the rest of the city subsidizes people who annex from River Road, Santa Clara. And that's problematic for me. I don't mind having people annex into the city, and I think it's a good thing that they do, but if it's going to cost the rest of the city to subsidize them to do that over a period of time, that's a non-starter for me. So this analysis does have a lot of assumptions in it, but $400,000 net revenue to provide police and the library and all the other city services, except for the Parks District and Fire District for fire services, isn't a wash. So that's just that one service potential. So we need to have a more detailed conversation about this and figure out how to do that. And maybe there's a hold harmless agreement without certain services for 10 years or something like that. So there's many variations on the theme that could work. So merits a lot more conversation about how we proceed. So I think you could do it parallelly, but I think how you do this would be a separate conversation, separate from the. And I didn't hear anything from what you said that the area plan would be inconsistent with doing this. You could still do the area plan and do this same time.
Absolutely.
Is that everybody have that same understanding?
Talk louder.
The knock up there.
They said you're,
Talk into the microphone.
Claire, and then I've got to wrap it up.
All right, I'll try and be brief. So I appreciate what Councilor Clark is saying. I think that working on an area plan is definitely a way to build trust, and also particularly addressing, trying to vision how the Parks District in particular would be handled is another way I think we can build that trust. Even though I understand Councilor Zelenka's concern about this idea of a subsidy, I just can't imagine not working towards trying to incorporate this patchwork out there. And it will have dramatic effects, I think, on the city in terms, who knows, it might create a new ward, depending on how many residents are out there and how many voters we have when we go through redistricting again. And a couple of particular questions that maybe would be better answered at another time, but do we have a formula in general for what it costs the city to provide services to a resident, to a generic residence?
In which way?
Well, that's the question. Right?
Right. I mean, we do have a per capita cost of providing city services.
So we have some formula that we can base some of these things on. And I also wonder, under this kind of hold harmless model, how new construction would be seen in terms of SDC charges and those kinds of things. So there may be other revenues that come in through these actions that aren't necessarily reflected in these very high-level assumptions. Is that correct?
You know, I feel a need to address this assumptions issue. And we say there's a lot of assumptions in these numbers. There are some assumptions in these numbers. What this represents is taking actual tax bill information. It says if you're going to hold harmless 100% of the people that are currently not in the city at this moment, how much tax revenue will the city actually receive? And these numbers are not exact, and so I do know that. What it says is that part of those monies that already get taken by other general governmental units, whether the schools and various districts in the county, says that the parks and recreation facilities would be continued to be River Road Parks District. It would say that any other parks that are out in those areas would be continued to get maintained as they are now. It says that the fire service is being provided out there through a couple of different mechanisms, and those will continue to be done. But then the net amount that really is available is plus or minus what you see. And so that, and the purpose of this isn't to argue whether or not it's a good deal or not. It's really to talk about, this is kind of the financial underpinnings or foundation of what we're trying to work with as we move forward. And so as council makes decisions, it's just important to have the whole story, and that's what we're trying to present here.
I really appreciate that, and I don't have a problem with the assumptions. I think the big assumption is the 100% of properties come on board, so you're just scaling it from that.
So if it's less than 100%, it's less.
Exactly.
It's worse.
Yeah. So kind of to speak to Councilor Zelenka's point, I don't know if this is an exact parallel, but we do have this MUPD program, and we do have a program where we're willing to defer taxes for a certain amount of time in order to be deliberate about where we want to see certain development. And so I think there's a parallel here that we're taking deliberate action in order to embrace a part of our community that's not fully integrated, and we may be willing to take a deferral on some of that income while we make that process work. So I think there's a way to think about that in that context too.
We're going to wrap up this conversation now, and the only comment I want to make after listening to this, and maybe I'm not hearing it correctly or something, but I just want to be sensitive to the fact that you're talking about building trust, and at the same time, there's conversations about full annexation and things of that sort that, to me, put this the cart ahead of the horse, because they have to see that there's a plan that we've agreed on and it's going to work together before they have the confidence. So I'm just worried about the order of things and the messages that we send. I think it's very important that we continue down the road together and try to think about what we would like to achieve in the end and how to get there. Yes, Betty.
I want to clarify that we're not talking about a tax exemption. Claire just mentioned mufti. We're not talking about not having them pay any taxes. We're talking about keeping the taxes just the same as they are right now for 10 years.
But they would be under the county.
Yeah, the same as they're paying right now, or what they, not bringing them up to city tax standards. Yes, thank you.
So this is, I think, a very, I think the one thing that I heard was an agreement on the area area plan from everybody. That seems like a wise thing to move. I think we also heard there's a lot of other sort of iterative discussions that have to happen as we move through this, and I think there's a willingness on the part of this body to continue those conversations as we move through the process. I would just want to caution, though, that as we do that, we're careful about trying to talk about how we do this together as opposed to doing something to them. I mean, that's
With instead of two.
so just want to be...
It's not a hostile merger, it's a friendly one.
Yeah. John?
If I may, a possible solution to getting started and taking care of neighbors, I think Mike is absolutely right. There's some neighbors that have no idea what an area plan is, and it really won't matter to them. But there are others of us that it does. So perhaps if the annexation offer went beyond the period of the area plan, you would be able to get that process rolling, but still give those of us who are going to say, I'm going to wait and see, a window where we could join in.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
We have a brief moment to have a conversation.
Give you a brief moment.
You have to be prosperous at 15 minutes.
Show me the money.
Hey, I owe you a phone call, too, sorry.
So we just wanted to provide a quick update on our regional prosperity economic development efforts, particularly efforts that are underway to look at our regional economic development services that have historically been provided by the Lane Metro Partnership. The current status of the partnership is that they've hired an interim director. They've hired John Lively, a former Lane Metro Partnership director. And this really will allow the regional partners to continue to provide some level of service during this transition period and continue having a kind of a regional single point of contact that can be used to coordinate our kind of regional economic development efforts and ongoing projects that we're working on in the region. This interim work is being directed by an executive committee that's made up of Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, the two chambers of commerce, the current Lane Metro Partnership Board Chair, and the former Lane Metro Partnership Board Chair. The transition is underway. There's currently an active caseload of projects that John Lively is working on, some of which have involved into actual site visits and so forth. So that new kind of transition arrangement is actually being implemented as we speak. We've agreed to release some interim bridge funding to support the Lane Metro Partnership for a 6-month period in the amount of $3,000 a month, and those funds will be matched with some, supplemented with some cash that the Lane Metro Partnership had on hand. So we'll be contributing to their operations for about a 6-month period. In addition to the establishment of this kind of interim framework, the regional partners, Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, and the two chambers, we've initiated a process that's being referred to as the Regional Economic Development Big Look, which is basically a process designed to evaluate best practices, new approaches to regional economic development that better serve kind of our overall regional goals. And this process includes a contract with an economic development consulting firm, TADZO, out of Yakima, Washington. They're currently on contract, and they've worked with communities really all over the country looking at assessment and alignment of how economic development services are provided in various communities. And this big look process basically includes looking at various models and best practices from other communities, stakeholder interviews, partner mapping, which is basically just a way to look at all the partners that are involved in economic development at some level and trying to coordinate all of the goals and try to figure out what appropriate structure might be moving forward. The outcome of this work is to align the partners' goals, to recommend some alternatives for a structure moving forward, structure that best serves our region and our economic development goals, including structural issues related to what services and programs are provided, what's the board composure, what are the different funding and staffing models for this type of service program. The Big Look process is underway, and it's expected to take about 3 months. Based on the findings and recommendations that come out of that process, the regional partners would have the opportunity to really consider the alternatives that come forward and then decide ultimately, which alternative they may want to pursue, but ultimately decide if one of those alternatives is something that we want to invest in moving forward. Although we're just providing an update today and we don't really have a lot of time, what we would like to hear from council is, looking forward, what your expectations are for economic development, an economic development organization that serves the region, and then how you would define success from, these regional economic efforts that we are putting forward via this service provision. Of course, we'll be back talking in more detail about this at some point, but we also expect to talk further about other regional economic development initiatives. And after the first year, we expect to provide an update, for example, on the recent summit that we have had. There are some findings and some potential strategies that we are working on in the form of a report that we hopefully will have done in January, and so we would like to update you on that. Other initiatives, the further discussion about implementation of the eWeb Riverfront Master Plan, the RAIN program, broadband plan. There are several other regional prosperity initiatives that after the first of the year we plan to come back and discuss, and the Lane Metro Partnership Regional Service Provision is also one of those as well.
We have a very short period of time, but I'm happy to try to go around. Any of you have something you'd like to say about the what your expectations are and how you define success? I'd like to hear it. And I saw Claire, I saw George, I saw Betty, and Greg.
Mike.
George, Betty, Greg, Mike.
I think you got
All
it.
right, so for me, it's a little challenging to answer that question because I have to admit I only have the vaguest notion of what the Lane Metro Partnership's role is. I understand they, will be a recruiting agency to try to bring employers here, but truly beyond that, I actually don't know. So what would be helpful for me would be a memo perhaps from you, Denny, that kind of just highlights what has generally been our relationship with them and what have we expected from them in terms of either service or cooperative ventures in terms of how we look at economic development. One of the things that I see is that we are seeing a lot of smaller or medium-sized businesses, and that there may need to be a role for fostering those that are already here and helping them grow, as opposed to continually looking out to bring others in. And so I don't know if that's an appropriate role for Lane Metro Partnership, and that's the kind of thing I'm trying to find out. Thanks.
George.
Yeah, thank you. If the decision is to move forward with the new version of the economic development entity, I'm not even going to refer to it, what I would like to see is that it's important to have one central contact for the new companies that are looking to move here, the referrals coming in from the state, as well as the companies that are already here, the businesses that are already here, they're looking to expand and stay in our community. They need one contact person or organization, and then that kind of acts as a filter to direct them to whichever direction they need to go. And it's important that all the agencies are involved, the entities involved in this new look, work cooperatively instead of against each other. I mean, that, I think, has been the biggest detriment to the economic development efforts in this county for a number of years, is that it seems like everybody's tried to work against each other, trying to get that big win for their community. Because no matter where a company lands or expands, it's going to benefit the people in our community, because if it's a company that's already here, it's going to take its workers with them across a freeway, whichever direction, and employ more people. And real quickly, Claire, when Glenda was working for the Metro Partnership before, about 90% of her work was with existing companies to help them do exactly that, to stay here and expand their businesses. So a lot of it is local work.
Betty.
Thank you. Question, that $3,000 per month, is that in addition to what we're already contributing to the Metro Partnership?
No, actually, the amount of budgeted for this fiscal year was $47,000, and we have not dispersed any of that for this fiscal year. So in the end, we'll end up probably spending less this fiscal year than that $47,000, because we have not dispersed anything
And that goes
today,
to salary, the $3,000?
It supports their operations, which includes an interim director, a staff person, paying utilities, and I think the chamber has provided some rent assistance to lower their rent. I think the overall, they're probably, during this interim period, will have about a budget that represents about a half of what it used to be, so it's kind of a scaled-down operation.
Well, we're already spending money on our staff for economic development, I understand. So I agree that we should be cooperating rather than contesting with other communities, but I think that paying to have people come here is not a good thing. I like helping local businesses. I think that's important, but look what happened with Hyundai. We spent a lot of money on their infrastructure. They had the tax breaks, and then they left. Thank you.
Ray?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm interested in developing more of a profile in terms of where our urban agriculture and food issues are. I think that, I sent a memo to council a few weeks back about how do we move this issue forward. How do we, develop a task force? How do we reframe what our food policy is so that we can start moving forward with taking advantage of the indigenous business opportunities that are here in Lane County? And so I'm far more interested in growing the fish that we have than trying to catch a whale that we continue to pursue. I think that what we have done with the brewery industry and the wine industry, there's a huge opportunity for us to replicate that with the rest of the food industry, and that we're missing this opportunity by not being more aggressive in terms of developing the opportunities that we currently do have. I know that Lane County has done some things, but I think that we need to have a comprehensive vision, and we need to have a policy and a strategy that really accelerates our involvement and our ability to maximize those businesses that are here, and then help people to get involved in businesses that they may not have thought about before. Because urban agriculture is an opportunity for people to move off of subsistence and to move on to a situation where they will be taking care of themselves, taking care of other people, and providing, goods and services both from the unfinished end to the finished product end that, can be have a great multiplier effect in this community.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with everything Greg said, and this is going to be one of the very, very few times that I disagree strongly with nearly all of what my friends George and Betty said. I think that we've done now for some time a regional effort at economic development, and I think we would be wiser to put more effort into our city's economic development planning rather than regional. I'm not saying we shouldn't participate. What I'm saying is that both Springfield and Lane County are more aggressive than we are as an organization. And competition is a good thing, not a bad thing. And while I agree with you that a great part of larger economic development pictures is about employment, a big part of it's about tax base, too. When Hynix was here, they paid the city of Eugene more in property taxes than the next 9 property tax payers in the city combined. They paid more for the services the city provides than anybody by a country mile. And that's what our city is missing right now. I think we ought to be doing more as a local plan than a regional plan. I think the regional planning is good. I think we should continue to participate. But it should, as a matter of success, list some very specific things. I was on the board for Metro Partnership for a while, too, and I remember the board meetings, and we talked about an update of what was going on, but there was never conversations about, okay, we know which categories of businesses can succeed well here. We know some of the assets we have. Okay, what are the infrastructure needs to get there? Eugene needs to offer more land. We need more broadband opportunities in this way, in this part of the, in Springfield or in the county. There are infrastructure pieces that each of the municipalities can play a part of participating to make the whole better. And I don't know if we're communicating as clearly as we could be about that. I think the role of a centralized economic planning and economic development area can be to help facilitate the interaction between the municipalities about how to offer a better whole than we are doing right now. I think we should set very, very aggressive goals and be more concerned about them at our council level. We talk regularly about a regional problem of homelessness on a regular basis and talk about our city's response and what we will spend. We need to talk about regional economic development as a city-specific effort much more frequently than we do, in my opinion.
Alan?
Yeah, specifically to Hyundai, the tax breaks did go away when they left, which I didn't support in the first place. But to say that their services were subsidized isn't correct for the infrastructure that they received. When they left, we saw a big hit to our property taxes, well over $1 million. We saw city services cut because of that. Water rates went up, sewer rates went up, and electric rates went up because when they left. And if they had been subsidized, that wouldn't have happened. Actually, the opposite happened. They were actually subsidizing the rest of us. So although they did get that tax break for the economic development zone, enterprise zone, I support the big look. I guess the question I have is, what are the questions that we're asking within that big look? Is there a list of questions that we're looking at, or is it just we're going to get together and chat about this, or is it more organized than that?
The consultants actually are developing questions that they will be asking various stakeholders and partners, so that is actually being led by the consultant team, and they have a lot of experience doing this, so in a sense we've reviewed the questions, but we've relying on them and their expertise to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm. And when will those questions be done?
I think they are actually starting to interview stakeholders and partners, and I think that process is actually underway. Some of that may bleed into January.
Oh, okay. Can we see those questions?
Sure.
Send those to us. I support the bolstering the city local efforts. I think that's a good idea, and also the regional efforts that we have on food and beer and wine and green infrastructure that we've got going here, organic foods and things like that. I think those tend to be more regional issues, and cooperation is the hallmark of success in that arena. But we don't, and without some kind of body that focuses on that, it will be this disparate, everybody doing their own thing, which I think is less effective. So I like to see actually both things occur. I think both those things, we don't do enough of either of them at this point.
Rich Brown?
Thanks, Mayor. Well, earlier we were asked, well, what are our expectations from all these efforts, and how do we define success? And I haven't got the slightest idea, because we don't know. I don't know how to answer either one of those at this moment, and I would like to know more. I mean, any information you can. I realize it's a work in progress, the big look, and I'm like to. I think it'd be good if council could be kept abreast of all that. I realize it's not done. The report's not done yet. And I think you said at 3 months or so we'll be able to see a report. But and the firm that's facilitating all this is Tazo, or
Called TADZO, TDZO.
And how much are we paying them for all this work?
Our contribution is $10,000 for a total contract of $30,000.
I see. Yeah.
And again, that's part of our $47,000 that we budgeted for this activity.
I see. Okay. Yeah. No, I look forward to seeing their report when it comes out, and then maybe we could answer some of these other questions. We might know what our expectations might be. I'd like to point out one thing, having been in the grocery business for a long time, that I have seen the local agricultural thing grow enormously. And I'd just like to point out it was done by the entrepreneurs with very little help from government. In fact, I could mention cases where people met resistance in getting licensing and permits, and they overcame that and grew their businesses through the years, and some of them are enormously successful now. They employ lots of people, and they send local products all over the United States, air freight it, and there's 325 wineries now. And they really weren't recruited by anybody. I mean, word got out that Oregon's a fabulous place to grow stuff. So I mean, anything government can do to help, obviously I'm all for that. But I think we need to realize that for the most part, all of the successes of the local agricultural and then the subsidiary things of people taking products and combining them and making, salsas and all this stuff, that was done without any government encouragement or, direction or then. So I mean, if we can help that, that's great. But I'm just saying what's happened basically happened due to the efforts of the entrepreneurs. Thanks.
Chris,
Do we want to extend it a couple minutes, or
a couple minutes.
Okay, I'll go fast. Economic development is one of those things that evolves over the years, and we've been talking about this for 35 years, the 35 years I've been here, even before the Metro Partnership. And the interesting thing about economic development is it's not something you can make happen. You don't drive economic development, you react to the economy or business or what's happening. And so the role of economic development has gone through cycles, and it's evolved, and I've seen it go all the way from, and I used to do this, get on planes and go down to California on recruiting trips, which was ridiculous, but we thought that would work at the time, to a more business at the local level support and providing infrastructure, and we'll continue to have that conversation because we always do. We try to decide what role we can have in economic development, and I've come to the conclusion that economic development is not a push, it's a pull. You have to provide what people want, and then they will come to you, whether it's in food service or whether it's in anything else. So you don't make people do anything. They come to you because you have what they want. That's what it really boils down to. Hynix moved here because we had clean water and we had a great employee base, and we were less expensive. And the tax break was a nice incentive, but that wasn't the primary reason they moved here, because I've talked to them, and it was our education level, it was our workforce, it was the clean water, and it was the land that they could get. and they employed 1,000 people. That was hundreds of millions of dollars of payroll, that no one ever talks about. So economic development happens when you understand what it is. And so we do need to have that big look conversation and say, what is economic development today? Because it's very, very different than it used to be. And how we respond to it is very different than it used to be. But we can't forget the fact that we're doing all of this because we want a healthy, stable economy. That's what we need to keep reminding ourselves. And if we can build that on local businesses, then we should build it on local businesses. And if we can build it on out-of-town businesses, we should build it on out-of-town businesses. But they don't come here because we make them come here or we just wish them to come here. They come here because we have something they want. And so that requires us to make the commitment and the investment in this area to make sure we have what they want. And it's not conceit and it's not self-importance or the belief that we're the most beautiful person sitting in the row. It's because we really are those kinds of things. That's where economic development really works. And the degree to which a metro partnership or a local effort or a regional effort can create that kind of condition is what we need to throw our full support behind. That's when economic development will work.
So just to wrap this conversation up, I would say that what I've heard from places where this conversation has been is that everybody can say that they, want high tech or what, and yes, you do. But what is it that you've got that's special or different that would make it that niche grow for you? So you have to figure out what you do best and build on what you do best, which is what I think you were pointing at. And then I just would not like this conversation to end without saying I would think all the guys in the Brew District and other places would say that city low-interest loans have been key in helping them grow and prosper. Those are small things which they borrow and then they pay back into the pot so somebody else can use them to do what they need to do. So it's a very important role. It's just one piece, but it's a very significant one. And just in agreement with all of you, I think we need to know what we want and then put that into the regional discussion. It's not having the regional discussion tell us what we're supposed to do. It's vice versa. It's we decide where we want to go, and then we put that into the conversation, and then and they'll do the same. Springfield will do the same. The county will do the same. They'll all put what they want into the conversation, and we see what we can drive together and how we can build a better whole for our community so our families can do better than they've been doing. Thank you all very much.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, all.
Get the goats.
Holidays.